Welcome to Gutsy Talks. I'm Rachel Larson, your host, naturopath and nutritionist, and I'm here to have real, honest conversations that can help you heal your gut, calm your mind, and fall back in love with food. Together with leading health experts, we'll dive into all things gut health and explore the deep connections between your gut and overall well-being, so you can feel empowered to take control of your health and live your best life. If you love all things gut health, follow me for more on Instagram at rachel.larson or head to rachellarson.com.au. Now, let's get into today's episode. Today, we're joined by Carla Wrenn, a leading naturopath and functional medicine practitioner with over 20 years of experience. Carla's mission is clear and powerful: to bring hope to those facing complex and chronic diseases. Carla is a sought-after speaker in integrative oncology, long COVID, and chronic disease, sharing her expertise with both healthcare professionals, patients, and the public. Today, she's here to dive into the complex world of post-viral immune dysfunction. So get ready for some profound insights. Welcome, Carla.
Thank you so much for having me, Rachel.
I'm so excited to have you here. As I was saying to you off, I guess, before we press record, that this is a topic and this is an issue I see in clinic, and it is really hard to treat. This isn't the simple stuff that we're talking about anymore, highly complex. And your name came to mind, and I thought we needed to have this conversation and people needed to know more about this topic.
Definitely, definitely.
So tell me, obviously, you've got your fingers in many pies. You're known as integrative oncology work, you got complex issues, but what drew you to this world of post-viral immune dysfunction?
So I guess as naturopaths, we've always been handling post-viral issues for people, and it probably is most commonly starting out in practice when we see people who have glandular fever and have been well since. And
Yes.
then I guess kind of that post-viral picture fits in with lots of illnesses. Maybe we think of things like chronic fatigue syndrome or other autoimmune. So it's kind of a little bit bread and butter for practitioners. But of course, as COVID came around, I'm in Melbourne. And so, we had our challenges, and I started to see lots of communication in the media that said, we're going to do research and there'll need to be lots of funding and we'll have to find solutions and looking for that like one magic pill or bullet idea. And I was like, hang on a moment, we've been dealing with this for a long time. I must have some solutions for these people who were feeling like that they hadn't recovered from an acute infection.
Yeah.
And then I was super excited when I delved into the research and found that already, and this is early on, like maybe mid to late 2020. So, there's starting to be some
Yes.
COVID issues. There was already research published. So some researchers jumped on this as an opportunity to do some extra research. And there was already a couple of great papers, some of them by my favorite integrative oncology authors, actually, saying like these herbs and these nutrients would be worth trying. And I guess, the best thing about complementary medicines, or one of the best things, is our therapies are really low risk. So it literally came out of a place of like, well, these people have no options. I've got these really safe options and this historical use of treating
Yeah.
viral illnesses or post-viral illnesses. So like, what the heck, I'll just give it a go.
Yeah. Wow. I mean, we know obviously there was a big need for it, and we're obviously going to get into all of the like hows and whys of post-viral. And if somebody is listening to this thinking, okay, I understand like the glandular fever type link, but can you just explain, if someone isn't clear, like what is post-viral immune dysfunction? Like how would you define that?
Yeah, well, we could steal the COVID definition. The World
Yep.
Health Organization and lots of other people have fine-tuned the diagnosis criteria over a period of time. But essentially, it's a group of symptoms that don't resolve, that you didn't have before your illness, your viral illness, that have continued to persist. And the time frame varies depending on different countries. But I would say probably definitely that have persisted for 8 weeks. Some
Mm.
definitions will say 4 weeks, but I think our understanding of viruses in general needs to improve. And I would
Mm.
say anything from kind of 4 weeks to 8 weeks could just be that you haven't rested enough. Like a big part of this is viruses take time to recover from. They're crafty little critters, and to be able to get well if you don't rest is a problem. And
Yep.
we saw this a lot even in that time. The government in Australia certainly was saying like rest for 7 days. You must stay home for 7 days. That doesn't mean you're well in 7 days. It just
Yep.
means you're less likely to be contagious. So
Yep.
that 14 to 30 day, 28-day recovery, I think is normal. But when it starts to push into 6, 8, 12 weeks, that's
Mm.
when we're starting to think about this post-viral illness. So when you've never been well since.
And I even think for some people, hearing 8 weeks is probably they're thinking, oh, really, like that soon? Like, I think people might think, oh, 6 months before you say something. But what we're saying is like it actually could be a lot sooner, given, although, like you're saying, we do need time to rest. And we're
Yeah.
probably not going to feel, back to ourselves after a few weeks. But, come around that 8 week mark, start to maybe question a few things and keep it on your radar.
There's a few symptoms that I think you can start to see patterns. Like a lot of my learning in post-viral illness is looking for patterns now, because when you see a large amount of
Mm,
patients, like I have through my long COVID care clinic, you start to see these patterns build up. And I think if the glands are still going up and down, and if you're getting night sweats and you've still got like classic viral symptoms at that 8 week mark, well, your body's not getting on top of it.
mm,
Or if you've got more systemic symptoms that aren't resolving or are progressing and getting worse, we
mm.
need to get some checks done to make sure that this isn't going to be activating something else, because that can happen too, but also that this isn't going to be a big drawn out process because your body's unable to recover for whatever reason.
Yeah, and you touched on symptoms. So I guess it's a bit of a two-part question. What are the symptoms? And do the symptoms, it's actually a three-part question.
Yeah, that's good.
Do the symptoms depend on the virus? And what type of viruses can turn into
Yes.
not long COVID, dysfunction?
Yeah, yeah, good. Okay, let's start with that first. So I
Yeah.
would say that some of the more kind of severe viruses would be the ones that we would tend to see problems with long term. So you
Mhm.
know you were sick and
Yeah.
you've picked up something. So glandular fever comes from the Epstein-Barr virus
Yeah.
or the cytomegalovirus. Now, Epstein-Barr virus is associated with the development of 88 or more autoimmune diseases. So we've known for a long time that this is like a problem virus,
Yes.
but about 80% of Australians have got antibodies in their blood that tell us that they've been around it. And of course, 80% of the population haven't developed problems from it. So you can have a really bad virus and recover, and sometimes not even know, and your
Mm,
body create antibodies. So those two. Then I would say, some of the Barmer Park viruses, there's a whole lot of kind of Ross River fever
mm,
viruses, like weird ones that you might not necessarily get. They're usually associated with a particular location. But influenza A, influenza B, the novavirus is a more gut-based one, and the paravirus, that can all, or parainfluenza virus, they can all give post-viral illness, because
mm,
really all that means is you haven't responded completely in your immune response to be able to get on top of that virus to the point where you don't have it persisting in your system,
yeah.
creating symptoms. And so then does the picture differ from virus to virus? Probably, but I would say now from my experience, like no symptom is off limits. So if someone
Yeah.
comes in and says they have, well, let's just put it this way. There's this thing called COVID toe. I don't know if you've ever heard of it, but if someone
No,
comes and
tell
says
me.
they have bright red toes, like purple
Really?
red toes, you wouldn't immediately think, oh, they've got a virus. You might think,
Yeah.
have they gout, or have they got a broken toe, or have they got like Raynaud's, which is an autoimmune disease around blood vessels in
Mm,
the fingers and toes. But no, like there's this thing called COVID toe, and it's this like weird colored toe. And that's
wow.
still a picture that we have to look at. So the problem with some of those viruses, like Epstein-Barr virus, you have to put cold sores and the shingles virus kind of in here as well,
Hmm.
is they can just crop up anytime. They're quite persistent and they affect lots of different organs. Um,
Mm,
the COVID virus specifically affects lots of organs because of the ACE2 receptor. So it targets areas that are high in this ACE2 receptor, which is conventionally kind of thought of something as part of the cardiovascular system, but actually there's ACE receptors in loads of tissue, lungs, muscles, all sorts of places around the body, even reproductive organs. So really like changes in menstrual cycle could be a picture. Like
mm.
any symptom that is different
Yep.
can pretty much be put down to a post-viral or viral illness.
And while you kind of people listening to that thinking, cool, so nothing's off limits, I think it's also good to know because nothing is off limits. If you're noticing something in your body and you're thinking, what is this? This isn't my usual picture. It might be COVID toe, which I'm so glad I know of, but and because I think probably other people know it.
You should Google that. There's some really good pictures. It's quite shocking. Yeah.
Okay, well, that's everyone's homework. Not that
Yeah.
this is a homework thing, but like we need to
Yeah.
all
Yeah.
look at that. But yeah,
Totally.
I think keeping all symptoms that aren't your normal picture on the radar is important. And I guess like you mentioned a few things about different receptors and things like that, but what is happening in our bodies when we are in that post-viral immune state? Like, what
Yeah.
is the consequence?
Yes. So I like to think of it this way. So when we have a bacterial infection, our aim is to get rid of that bacteria. So we might use antibacterial herbs, or we might use immune support herbs, or we might use antibiotics. And our aim is to eradicate that bacteria, or at least reduce it to a point where our body is able to use our own defenses to get on top of that acute infective stage.
Yeah.
But a virus is a bit different because of the way it replicates within the cell and can persist outside the cell.
Mm,
So we can have this issue called viral persistence. And the easiest way to think about this is cold sores. So you know if you're someone with cold sores, you might get them the first time and then the infection goes away. But if you get sunburnt lips, or you're in the wind, or you get run down, or you
yeah.
have a big stress, shingles is another one, like a big stressful event, these sores, like cold sores or shingles, might crop up. And
Mm,
you know that's just because you got run down and they were able to come back. And this is what's happening for some people, not all people, but some people in post-viral illness have this persistent infection that's non-resolving. And so
mm,
while you might get rid of the acute symptoms, you're then still got this kind of dormant virus is the word that's used that can then crop up if you're not resting enough, which is why we sometimes see that pattern in COVID, particularly of like people are feeling well, so they go back to work or sport or whatever it is that they're doing, and then suddenly they get worse again,
yeah.
even weeks or months later, if they have something particularly stressful. We have lots of athletes who have kind of gone back to their level of high performance sport and then have had their long COVID kind of crash.
Yeah.
And then I guess the other side of it is viruses challenge the immune system, and that sometimes provokes the immune system to make changes of autoimmune or inflammatory nature that then may change how the body's working. The gut and COVID has been very well researched now.
Mm,
We know that because of viral persistence and changes in the microbiome, gut symptoms can easily persist for 120 days. And the
mm,
study really only went for 120 days. So there could actually be much longer persistence. And I think my patients find that their gut isn't right for much
yeah.
longer than 120 days. But the research suggests that that virus might persist in the small intestines for 90 to 120 days. And so we're seeing different areas affected
Mm.
because of the short-term effect of the virus and the potential long-term effect of the virus.
Yeah, so there's lots of moving parts. And I think
Yeah.
like what you were also mentioning as well, I guess, is I'm going to call it triggers for lack of a better word, but I guess like additional stresses that we're putting on the body, which then I guess have these things pop back up. And cold sores is a great example of that. I get cold sores and it is my tell that like you're pushing, like, you're burning the candle, Rachel. You got
Yeah.
to slow down because your body, your immune system is now not coping. Something has allowed, it's allowing something to thrive, which I guess I would have otherwise maybe kept in check.
Yes, and unfortunately, sometimes it takes a long time for people with post-viral illness to realize that. I talk about it as the canary in the coal mine. Like
Mm,
POTS, I'm not sure if you're familiar with POTS, but POTS
yes.
is postural orthostatic tachycardia syndrome. It's a difficulty with really low blood pressure or variable blood pressure. So these people who have POTS have trouble with dizziness, feelings of that they're going to faint, not really being able to move around normally, and generally feeling a lot of fatigue. And it's a super common symptom in long COVID. And for them, it's got to do with really like the fact that the virus has had an effect on multiple systems, and then
Mm,
we start to see that symptom as the telltale sign. So they could be really good and going well, but maybe they decide to return to work, or they do some sport. Like the amount of athletes, it's like sport is dangerous when it
mm,
comes to
mm.
post-viral illness.
Yeah.
The amount of athletes that'll do too much, and then the next day that POTS will start up again, and that's the sign to them. Or later in the day, they'll start to get migraine or some symptom that just says like you pushed it too far. And if we
Yeah.
can find that symptom, like with your cold sores, it's a really great way of going, okay, gone too far, and
Yes.
we need to rest now. And that doesn't necessarily get picked up and people push on.
Yeah, of course, because people don't want to, I guess, have their lives stop, but there is a point where it's like we need to actually work with this because by not stopping or not reducing or just kind of working, I guess, in a bit of a more restful space and capacity, we're prolonging these issues. I can imagine that's a very difficult one if you're a pro athlete, but I think even as a non-pro athlete that has gone out after feeling sick and has done some exercise and come back and thought, bad idea. I think we can all
Yeah.
kind of relate on that level, how pushing your body too far can kind of kick you in the bum a little bit.
Totally. Like it's new mums and it's,
Mm,
corporate workers and it's tradies. It's everyone. This is the problem. It affects so many people because if you're putting your body under physical or mental stress
mm,
and disrupting that homeostasis, like pushing yourself kind of outside balanced, these symptoms can crop up.
mm, absolutely. So, what are the risk factors associated with people developing post-viral immune dysfunction? We were talking about like, a lot of us, kind of all of us have had viruses, but not all of us kind of develop into a post-viral state. What do we know
Yeah.
about that?
I feel like that we don't completely understand it all. And even recently, like hypermobility and something called Ehlers-Danlos syndrome, which is a type of kind of suite of hypermobility conditions,
Mm,
had been one of the things that has been kind of more recently brought to the forefront. And we know that these people with hypermobility are also susceptible to mold illness and other issues more commonly because of part of the way their immune system's working and then the fact that they aren't really in a homeostatic balance.
mm,
But like early on, being a woman, having another autoimmune disease, already having issues with viruses, having had other diagnosis, thyroid issues like this, really a huge amount of risks. I would say people who weren't well to begin with
yeah.
makes up about 30% of the people that I see. So they already had chronic fatigue syndrome, or they already had an autoimmune disease, or they already had cardiovascular disease, diabetes and kidney disease were other factors,
Mm,
lung conditions. Like, so if someone wasn't well, this was
mm,
like the cherry on top, to tip them over the edge. So there are both genetic factors, and from being a female to having hypermobility as a genetic tendency,
mm.
through to just not being well. I think you can't really exclude anyone was what we found.
Wow, that is, I mean, I guess it goes to show that there's just so many variables and obviously so much to learn about this. But I think it's interesting where I guess a bit of the point where you're making is it feels like viruses can see that there's a susceptible individual,
Yeah,
and that could look different for everybody that we're talking about, from, as you
yeah.
said, from thyroid to cardiovascular to everything else. But like it's about, I guess, susceptibility in the individual for that virus to say, great, I can stay.
Yeah, totally. Yes.
What is it about post-viral immune dysfunction that is happening this day and age? Is it the fact that it is more common? Is it the fact that it's more acknowledged? Like, do we have any statistics? Or is it again just a bit of an area that we're still learning about? So we don't really, yeah, like I
Yeah.
don't know. I don't know.
Yeah, I feel like there's all the typical factors like we're working in our lives harder, faster, wanting more, not resting. We don't convalesce when we are sick,
Mm,
and we put our bodies under lots of pressure, whether it be the environments that we're living or the work that we do or the
mm,
nutrient deficits in our diet. Like I think all of that contributes too. But I just think probably COVID and the fact that this was such it was like a little mini experiment, really, an awful mini experiment. But we
mm,
saw that maybe, in a population, a small percent of people were getting nasty viruses and were unwell. We
mm.
just saw an exponential growth in that research. And really, a lot of health complaints have benefited from the research that came out of COVID. Anyone who had chronic fatigue syndrome or fibromyalgia in the past would have been put down as perhaps, it being in their head or,
Yeah.
they were just like a bit of a weak or sensitive person, or they had, other problems. And it has really brought to the forefront how viruses can have such a big impact on some people's health. But I
Mm,
think there's going to be more and more to learn.
yeah.
And, that adds to so many other knowledge base for other health complaints too.
Yeah, I think that makes sense. I think COVID was just this crazy thing that's happened in our lifetime, which has led to more research, validated things that were already happening. And obviously, given it's still only that virus, as we know it, is still only around that 5, maybe 6 years old, if that's kind of, I guess, when the world
Yeah,
really started experiencing it. So it can sometimes take time, I guess, longer than that, perhaps, to really know the full extent to how these things progress and change. So I guess a bit of
totally.
bit of a watch this space type of thing. I wanted to ask you something which I know that our listeners and potential commenters and whoever is listening to it will be thinking about, and that is the role between this post-viral immune dysfunction in between vaccinated and unvaccinated populations. What
Yeah.
do we know about that issue?
Yeah, good question. And so there will be a lot of comments potentially that people feel like post-viral illness comes as a side effect or a risk associated with vaccinations. And very early that study was done, and has continued to be done. And what was found was that the balance of post-viral symptoms occurs in both vaccinated and unvaccinated individuals at the same rate. And so really, I think we have to look at other drivers other than just the vaccine as a cause for this happening for people. And that kind of speaks to the rate at which people were developing issues from post-viral illness before there was even vaccinations we were using for these kind of viruses.
Yeah, yeah, that makes total sense. And I think as well, like you've said, we've been speaking about the susceptibility of the individual. So perhaps vaccinated or not, if there was a degree of susceptibility that the virus saw as an opportunity, then, that being something that needs to be considered.
Exactly.
I'm glad we spoke of that. I know it can obviously be a bit controversial, but it was the
Yes.
elephant in the room, wasn't it? We had to
Yeah,
see
totally.
that.
We got to talk about it. Yeah.
So you mentioned before a bit about the gut, and obviously, like I love the gut, and I have had patients who have had this issue of post-viral immune dysfunction, their gut flares, some people worse than others. Again, we're all different. So what is the link between gut is it and either our susceptibility to post-viral immune dysfunction? Yeah, what's happening?
Yeah. So I think that there's kind of two ways we can look at this.
Hmm.
I would say that any immune challenge is going to have the potential to disrupt the microbiome, and that would be amplified if you were to do kind of antibiotics or other therapies that are kind of damaging that microbiome. COVID in the research has a specific impact on the microbiome. Some species increase, some species reduce. And so despite the fact that we're talking about a virus, it's having effect on bacteria, and the balance of the bacteria and the other species within the microbiome. And so having a poor or underfunctioning microbiome beforehand probably is also one of the things that make you more susceptible to illness in general, but also and an infection in general, but also infections like COVID. What also has happened is as a way some viruses are working, particularly COVID, they are affecting right through the body. And so the digestive system function, right from things like reflux and heartburn, which is really common,
Mm.
through to changes in intestinal permeability, lots of diarrhea and bloating, and just general gut disruption. And it can go
Mm.
to constipation, but more often we're seeing diarrhea. It speaks to the fact that we are getting changes in inflammation, changes in microbiome, and that there is some viral persistence in that lower portion of the digestive system. And we don't know how long it lasts for. And then if there is that microbiome change, people are becoming more intolerant to certain foods, which you would know
Yes.
and your audience would know would then increase their gut problems. And we've just got a bit of a vicious cycle on the gut. And
Yeah.
so one of the first interventions for people who have gut issues, and it seems to be really cut and dry when we're looking for the drivers, like some people will have gut problems. Some people won't have gut problems. A group of the people that have gut problems from long COVID or post-viral illness, they already had a sensitive gut. So, there's these layers, but if it's there, it's one of the things we want to focus on first because it's a big
Mm.
or a telltale sign that their microbiome's not right anyway.
And is there markers or in terms of certain microbes or metabolic byproducts or anything that you're seeing? I guess you see so many people. Are you
Yeah.
seeing different things in
Yeah,
different
100%.
testing?
So there's a lot of great research on this. And as you would expect to see with lots of kind of other gut dysfunctions, like butyrate production
Mm.
dramatically reduces.
Yep.
And there's imbalance in the microbiome in lots of different ways. But changes in lactobacillus numbers is one of the ones that is reported on most commonly. So very early on, a study was done called the PhytoV study. And it looked at a supplement that you can buy overseas. I wouldn't say it's an amazing supplement. I would just say they probably had lots of funds. So they did
Yep.
a research paper, which then made them a very popular supplement. So PhytoV is a combination of a really basic probiotic and some nutrients, so it's essentially like mimicking having more nutrients in your diet and a probiotic. And they saw really great results. And so
Mm.
then as we start to think about, well, we can get a much better probiotic than that, and then increase our diversity in foods, we started to see ways that we could move forward and trying to expand that butyrate production and rebalance things. And I really just went in with some nice, gentle, multi-strain probiotics. I never really focused too heavily on one type or the other, unless someone had terrible diarrhea when we might have used some Saccharomyces boulardii or something like that. But yeah, quite specific details now about the changes that happen in the microbiome. And,
Mm.
looking at stool samples of people, 90 days, 120 days on, they still had COVID persistent. Now, this research hasn't been done to my knowledge for people with other viruses in quite the same level,
Yeah.
but I think we can extrapolate, when you have the immune system focusing heavily on one thing, imbalance happens, especially if there's a dietary factor. And if people are super fatigued, they don't bother to cook quite as well, or their whole family is not well, that dietary shift even has an impact on that gut health, I think, and the picture of post-viral illness.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting. Like I've seen a number of stool tests, and I would also say the butyrate decreasing is something I see. There's a few species which are relatively common, but I have seen them. I probably don't have as many patients of this nature
Mhm.
that you're seeing, but just in my experience with post-viral gut issues, I've seen a lot of Bacteroides, I think vulgaris, or
Yes.
vulgaris. That one tends to be one that I see quite high. I mean, I see it in a lot of dysbiotic guts anyway, but in the post-viral community, I'm like, oh, that seems to be quite high.
Yeah.
Like it takes
Yeah.
up a big percentage. So
I
that's
would
like, yeah,
agree.
yeah.
Yeah, I would agree. And I would love to do more stool testing. I'm sure someone out there is doing it, but more stool testing on patients, like, a year after they've started to feel like their symptoms
Mm,
are normalizing, because I suspect that probably persists for a really long time.
yeah.
And one of the challenges in the post-viral community, particularly when it's significant enough that it's affecting people's abilities to work,
Mm,
was funding. And so, we know that those lovely stool tests, unfortunately, are still not covered in Australia by Medicare. So
yeah.
I think we missed an opportunity to really explore what happened in the way we could have if we had have had access to more testing for more people.
100%. And the stool tests that we have, like particularly the metagenomic testing, like they don't leave anything out. Like they give you all the data. So to have been able to track that, wouldn't that
Yeah.
have been fun?
Yeah.
We needed to go back and just kind of somehow know that that's what we needed to do, but
Yeah.
we'll learn hopefully.
Exactly. I'm
So
sure someone's doing the research.
yeah, and if not, this is your this is your
Yeah.
reminder.
All to do it. Yeah.
So, how is post-viral immune dysfunction diagnosed? Like, is it a specific set of tests? Is it depending on the type of virus? I feel like it feels a little bit hard. It feels a little bit intangible, to be honest, when we're talking about full bodies, full systems, all the symptoms, and you're just like, cool, where do I begin? So, how do we start
Yeah.
getting a diagnosis for this, or is it more of a
Yeah.
criteria?
Uh, I'd say it's almost a diagnosis of exclusion. And so
Mhm.
there's a lot of tests. I definitely think doing the full blood examination and the general biochemistry, thyroid function. If you have any heart symptoms, definitely see if you can get some echocardiograph, those kind of more progressive tests to rule
Mm,
out other problems. And really, what I'm doing with a lot of the blood tests, like B vitamin deficiencies, iron status, vitamin D, inflammatory markers, like what I'm doing is trying to rule out other problems.
yeah.
Because very quickly after I started to work in my long COVID clinic, I realized that a lot of people had what I like to call invisible illness. So they had never been well since, and they attached it to viruses. And not just COVID, like they had glandular fever,
Yeah.
never well since, but also it can mimic like a lot of menopausal symptoms or perimenopausal symptoms, a lot of thyroid dysfunction. And so
Mm,
probably about 10%, if not more, of my patients, we were really like thinking and leaning into this being a post-viral illness, but we actually, when we did the testing, found that there was something else going on that I
yeah.
got them to address first. And so really the definition is literally, or the diagnosis is literally based on exclusion of other things, and then meeting the criteria of a kind of group of symptoms that have persisted for a period of time that in the
Yeah.
timeline correlates to post-virally.
Yeah. Look, and I think that makes sense. And I think that's where we do need to do testing, and there's sometimes maybe a lot of them to really
Yeah.
understand because we are ruling out all the differentials. We need to kind of make sure that it isn't menopause, it isn't just a thyroid thing, it isn't low iron, and it is
Exactly.
whatever else. Like we need to kind of get the negatives or at least pick up if there's other issues happening alongside. So
100%.
I think that's probably a good thing for people to know that there's not one test. It's probably going to take a bit of investigation just to keep
Yeah,
those expectations in check. And I guess
agree.
in terms of this diagnostic or even this management of post-viral illness, is it something that is recognized by GPs, by specialists? Is it something that only the naturopathic world understands? And I guess I'm asking that because there's going to be probably different practitioners that are running tests, but also the last thing you want to do is to be gaslit when you're trying to get help. So I guess yeah, who's really acknowledging this to
Yeah.
be an issue?
In the beginning, well, I actually think the UK really stepped forward, and English patients probably got the best care straight off. And in hindsight, that probably continued all the way through with them getting awarded. So people with long COVID in the US can be acknowledged as having a disability now and will
Mhm.
have access to disability funding schemes, which still hasn't happened in Australia, really, to my knowledge. Or I heard recently of one of my patients was awarded 15 cents a fortnight by our lovely
Wow.
Centrelink kind of disability officers. So, we're not getting a lot of support once someone is diagnosed. To
God.
get a diagnosis, I think it's case by case basis. And so I'd like to say that I think it's really improved. But
Mm.
in that early days, and I mean, we have to look at the medical system at that time was probably very overwhelmed. A
For
lot of it
sure.
was telehealth. Like, I think it did have that kind of traditional post-viral illness or invisible illness flavor where it was like it's in your head.
Yeah.
You're just depressed, or yes, we're all sad, or
Yeah.
but I think that changed. And as the government invested in things like long COVID clinics where you could go and see an exercise physiologist or have some other support done, especially for those really obviously chronically ill people, who did develop pericarditis or myocarditis or, God forbid, really serious issues where they needed ventilation, stuff like that.
Yeah.
Was an avenue for kind of support. And so over time, and I think celebrity has really helped here.
Mm.
In Australia, there was definitely some celebrities that came forward. One of our news readers came forward and talked a lot about her experience. Sports people kind of had people listening. And as we started to see what was happening in countries that were perhaps more affected than Australia, it started to filter down as it's something that needs to be acknowledged. But I guess the challenge has always been they don't really have a great solution because there was no antiviral that
Yeah.
they could give, or there was no, so maybe acute things like checking out the heart and doing
Yeah.
stress tests and things like that were great. But there was just this big gap of knowledge because they didn't have that wonder drug to kind of cure this multi-system illness.
Yeah. Yeah. So I guess maybe those traditional roles in terms of your GP may be more helpful in the test referral or,
Exactly.
more referral space. But yeah, I guess what you're saying is there needs to be all of these issues thought of holistically in terms of mitochondrial health, gut health, all those types of
Yes.
things.
Yes.
That may not be where they shine in your team, but it could be still a good idea to have a supportive GP or something like that on there for other
Totally.
reasons.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And rule out things because, the last
Yeah.
thing I want is to end up with someone, that has a really progressed heart issue. There were problems with clotting and stuff like that in the acute stage of COVID, or, someone who has glandular fever that's causing significant issues to their liver function. I don't want them in my clinic, being really unstable and me trying to use some lovely gentle herbs and doing something wrong. So, we
Yeah.
need to kind of triage people appropriately. But the good news is the really sick people usually, know where they're at and are seeing someone.
Yeah.
And it's just this kind of like lost in the middle people that are great for us to work with.
Yeah, totally. Are there any myths, false claims, fads regarding, I guess, this post-viral space that you just hate hearing about, you want to clear up? Are there things that people are peddling that is like, this is a thing you have to take or anything like that?
Oh, there probably is. The things that come to mind at the moment and the things I feel sorry for is that yeah, it's all in your head. I definitely think that these people just, like are using an illness to kind of like get off work or
Mm.
and then the whole like if this person wasn't vaccinated, it wouldn't have happened. And this is
Yeah.
just because they were vaccinated. Like all of that is dementing. I sat with these people while they literally cried and tried to figure out how to manage their whole life. So no one would wish this on their worst enemy.
Yeah.
And so I think the therapies, there probably was things happening where people were suggesting, let's use apple cider vinegar as an example. It's like
Yeah.
topically, there probably was an element of that happening.
Yeah.
But I guess the audience, and this is that one of the most interesting things about long COVID or post-viral illness in this time is it was led by the people who were suffering it. So
Yeah.
the push, the name, the diagnosis, the set of symptoms. Like if you watch the research from 2020 onwards of what even the set of symptoms were, that wasn't driven by clinics or
Mm.
research funds. That was driven by patients. And
Mm.
so the support groups of patients, we have a great one in Australia on Facebook called the Australian Long COVID Community. Those people were driving the understanding. And so I think if someone says they've got long COVID, it's they have symptoms that they feel haven't resolved, and it's got to be taken seriously. And there's enough evidence to say do these therapies that we don't need to use things that aren't research validated now.
Yeah, yeah. I think that's a great thing to clear up. Everything you've said, it is valid what people are talking about. Nobody would want to make it up or live a life affected by long COVID. Again, just kind of bringing up that there tends to be not too much difference between vaccinated and unvaccinated. So again, stop the blaming and shaming and, whatever side that you want are around that. So I think there's some really good things just from your both research and clinical experience to speak to.
Yes.
Obviously, we're not talking about prescriptions today. Everyone's different. But like you said, there's cool studies around some of the treatments that we're looking at, which are herbal and nutritional and lifestyle. Are there some like herbal medicines or nutrients that you're just like, this does great stuff for long COVID or
Yeah.
post-viral states?
Yeah, so many. And this was the exciting thing. Like the first study came out looking at herbs like rhodiola and ziziphus and withania and astragalus and schizandra. These are all herbs that we would think of as adaptogenic herbs.
Yeah.
So these support the body's ability to deal with stress. And then astragalus, which is another herb that we think of for immune support and has that adaptogenic property, started to have some good research around it because of kind of the historical use of vitamins. Of course, things like zinc and vitamin C picture really well, but that whole mast cell activation and histamine that became part of the unique
Mm.
COVID virus meant quercetin was starting to be recommended. And I find that B vitamin deficiencies, if someone has a B vitamin deficiency, maybe that's associated with methylation issues. Activated Bs and sorting out their B12 deficiency made a big difference for a lot of
Yeah.
people. So I would say no herb and nutrient is off the potential list,
Yeah.
but immune and adaptogenic herbs really fit that post-viral picture. And then getting all the nutrients right, like just making sure that someone has enough zinc, magnesium, all the basics, iron, and then starting to delve more deeply in some of the antiviral herbs. So,
Mm.
thuya and Bicol skullcap, nigella was another one that we used a lot of, lamatium, all the medicinal mushrooms. And then, when people had brain fog, we started to use things like lion's mane. And so really there's like nothing I wouldn't consider. And I guess
Yeah.
that's the beautiful thing about our herbs is are really focused in that initial stage of trying to isolate what the driver for the person's
Yeah.
post-viral illness is. Like, what was their picture? Did they have terrible brain fog and afternoon fatigue?
Mm.
Or did they have persistent viruses? If someone had a sore throat and swollen glands, we were thinking about things like thyme and thuya, which are antiviral herbs, maybe echinacea, and then we might use poke root, which is a traditional herb for lymphatics and the glands. And so we tried to stick with those patterns that we saw, and really picking those drivers enabled me to choose therapies. And things like NAC and nicotinamide riboside and nattokinase, like they all came out as we started to pull apart the picture of post-viral illness and how it affected different people in different ways.
And so you've just listed, and that's probably only a tenth of our, no, probably a fifth of our whole, I guess, dispensary in our world. And that's the amazing thing is that you've listed things which people are probably like, I don't even know what you said, but they're
Yeah.
names of herbs and then nutrients, but also matching the treatments to the person. It is this wonderful example of individualized support
Yeah.
and treatment where we are looking at the person's an individual nutritional levels, what their gut is doing. Yeah, I guess you said, what is their fatigue and their sleep and their brain fog and all these things, like to create a prescription for them.
Mm.
So it isn't a one pill for an ill. It isn't this, what is the antiviral? It is so much more than that. And actually, you mentioned something which I remember blowing up when COVID first came out, but it was NAC.
Yes,
That was just having its day, wasn't it? Like it was just,
totally.
and then it's a fantastic nutrient, but explained, I guess, for people who aren't aware of what N-acetylcysteine, NAC is, what that is.
Yeah, look, it's a nutrient that we use a lot for liver detoxification. Like, I guess in standard medicine, it's used a lot for overdose kind of situations. NAC was really specifically used to kind of target the spike protein. If I listed it on my favorite, most effective nutrients for long COVID, though, or post-viral illness, it probably actually wouldn't rate quite as high as we gave it. The
Yeah.
other one that went off was elderflower. Like, you couldn't buy
Oh
elderberry,
yeah, that was big.
elderflower for love nor money. And that probably did turn out to be quite good. But, I think like the little quiet heroes are sometimes more interesting. Like I love licorice for patients who have POTS. It's an adaptogen. It is an antiviral. So licorice, not like eating the licorice,
Yes.
unfortunately, but like traditional licorice
Damn.
preparations that do taste like licorice. So they are still quite yummy, have like a real affinity for post-viral illness.
Yeah,
And so, yeah, there was kind of the ones that everyone rushed to get and the ones that didn't really do much. But I like to think that one of the things that has come out of kind of this post-viral space is a lot more people realized how important their immune system was. And when you keep your immune system well and you look after your whole body, you're less susceptible to all of these things. Now, I'm not certainly not saying people who didn't look after
correct.
themselves
Yeah, sure.
are the ones that are sick, because there is still some people who are devastatingly sick. But
Mm.
it was one of the things that I think people learned that, maybe they need to look at natural ways to improve their health.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and it's funny, like, we talk about the hype of people on social media and, NAC just running off the shelf, but what you're seeing clinically, you're like, oh, there's actually a few others which might,
Yeah.
in your
Yeah.
experience, not to diss it, but again, there's just other things that can be considered.
Yes.
We spoke about obviously exercise and how not pushing it too far, when I guess you're in that convalescence, and that's just got to be something that we have to monitor. Are there any other lifestyle or additional treatment supports, way that we just live on a day-to-day basis that are helpful if someone has a post-viral illness?
Yeah. So I love working in this space because this is all the things that the patient or the person that's not well or their loved ones can control with
Mhm.
ease. And it's a great way to work where there's a relatively lower cost than taking a whole lot of supplements. And so exercise or movement, I like to call it, was really important because people started to think, okay, I'm just going to like get myself fit out of this situation. And that doesn't work. We don't want to do more than we normally do.
Mhm.
And pacing became the word that was discussed a lot. And pacing basically means pacing or controlling how much activity you do. Out of the chronic fatigue syndrome community came this term called using your spoons, literally like spoons, spoons that you would eat with.
Yep.
And spoons was used to describe how many spoonfuls of energy someone with a post-viral illness might have, and how you could use all your spoons just dropping the kids at school and doing the grocery shopping. You
Yeah.
might even use all your spoons just having a shower and washing your hair in the morning. And
Yep.
so we really need to find out how many spoons of energy people have and teach them how to use it appropriately. And
Mm.
so exercise is restorative and improves energy if kept in the sensible level. So the unfortunate thing is sometimes a sensible level was like walking to the letterbox and back, or just hanging out half the washing. And so people really had to relearn their relationship with exercise. Other modifiable lifestyle factors like getting proper sleep, like the amount of people I had to say, get off your phone late at night, or, they're really, really not well, but they're on their phone all day. And that's going to make their brain fog worse or their migraines worse because that light is and the pixels and the messages are sending constant stimulation. So resting when
Mm.
you have a virus does not mean Netflix, does not mean phone all day. Like I'm not a Scrooge. Like you can watch
Yep.
a little bit of it, but if you're spending the whole day doing that, your brain is not resting. Your body
Yep.
might be, but we needed the brain to rest as well because of neuroinflammation.
Mm.
Diet definitely makes a difference. There's an amazing program, which if you are suffering from post-viral illness, I would highly recommend you check out, called the Gupta program.
Mhm.
You might have heard Professor Gupta speak. He has spoken at some naturopathic conferences before, and he's got a whole protocol about brain retraining in post-viral illness and chronic fatigue syndrome. And that's just really profound around meditation and what people can do to mentally support themselves to recover. So
Mm.
yeah, lots that we can do. And dietary wise, I would say the Mediterranean diet, lots of fresh fruit and vegetables, and then some people benefit from a low histamine diet.
Mm. I think talking about these somewhat free or at least really accessible and manageable things are the things that we talk about the supplements, we talk about the herbs, but they don't mean anything if the other stuff isn't in check. So your treatments in terms of your paid supplements and prescriptions, whatever, will most likely work better if you've got your
Yeah.
foundation. So
Oh,
yeah,
totally,
they're
totally.
not, yeah.
No amount of adaptogen is getting you out of the situation that you're causing. If you're in a high stress environment, sensory overload was a big issue. So, like shopping centers with lots of noise and lots of light, like if you're working in that space and then you're
Mm.
coming home and you're on your phone and you're overdoing it, like no supplement is getting you out of that problem.
No, that is the hard truth. It does
Yes.
require lifestyle, especially because every single one, even though this is a gut podcast, every single one of my interviews, and I'm assuming it will continue this way, we always stress it's ironic I use the word stress. We always touch on the nervous system
Yes.
and its role. And basically, it is a non-negotiable that we all need to support. And we will keep saying it until the day that someone needs to hear
Totally.
it, listens to it, because it is, I think, the difference sometimes between making it or not, or seeing the change or not, is your nervous system.
I'm sure you've talked too about the vagus nerve and that connection between the gut and the brain. And the vagus nerve got a lot of attention in COVID and COVID post-viral illness because it really was part of that big reason that people were seeing multi-system illness. And so to try and settle that connection with the gut and the vagus nerve and the nervous system was a big part of recovery for a
Mm.
huge, I would say at least 50%, if not more, of my patients.
Yeah, I mean, and who wasn't stressed, in
Yes.
the
Oh,
in
totally. Yeah.
in the heat of it or in the height of
Yeah.
it.
Yeah.
So I want to end on this question that if somebody knows or has a gut feeling that they have a post-viral illness, what would your number one piece of advice to them be?
Big question.
You can give two.
If they suspect they have it, they're questioning whether they have it. I love a timeline, and maybe you do this with your patients as well. Literally write down all your symptoms and try and think when they started and see if you can do a timeline that suggests that you've had a virus or COVID in a period of time in the lead up to all those symptoms starting. And sometimes, now when people have had 3, 4, 5, episodes of COVID infections or other viral infections, that information can get lost. But if you can see that there's a clear trigger, then rule out some other things and get checked. Then I guess my other piece of advice is go back to those things that like if you're a shocker for staying up and going to bed at 11:30, 12 and doing all the TV beforehand and working too hard, like try 7 days of going to bed at 9 p.m. or earlier. And
Mm.
then hook into someone who's done training around complementary medicine and supported post-viral illnesses, and they'll be able to guide you where to go. And if you feel really, really overwhelmed, check out some of those post-viral communities on Facebook, and they're around now. You can get lots of support also from other people who have been through this now, because the great news is, especially post-COVID, so many people have recovered now
Mm.
that I think there's just a really good amount of research, both scientific research, but also that, accumulation of information that's there to guide people now.
I love that. And I absolutely agree that our history often holds the answers. In fact, kind of
Yes,
always holds the answers to our
yeah,
health. Sometimes harder to see, but it is a great place to start. And
definitely.
that, if you think it's happening to you now and you're looking for information, that fortunately there is the information out there. And if people were wanting to work with you or, learn from you and get help from you, how
Yeah.
do they reach you? How do they do that?
Yeah, so my main website is Carla Wrenn with two N's .com, or the long COVID care .co is the website for our specific long COVID or post-viral illness support clinic.
Amazing. And we will put all of that in the show notes as well. And we'll also link your Instagram as well if people want to jump on over and say g'day. But I
Yeah.
think this was an important conversation that we've had. I hope that has given people a sense of hope, also just debunked some things that we needed to debunk, and just really
Yep.
kind of shone a light on the complexities of the realities of what it is to live with a post-viral immune dysfunctional state. So thank you so much
You're
for
welcome.
sharing everything. It's been wonderful.
Yeah, thank you. Thanks for having me.
Thanks for tuning into Gutsy Talks. I hope today's episode left you feeling inspired to take the next step in your gut health journey. If you're ready to dive deeper, head over to rachellarson.com.au. There's a range of courses and resources waiting for you. If you loved this episode, I'd be so grateful if you shared it with others who might benefit from this information. And so you don't miss out on future Gutsy Talks, be sure to hit follow and leave a review. I'd love to hear your feedback. I'm Rachel Larson, and I can't wait to connect with you again for our next Gutsy Talk.